It is 6 o'clock. So I would like to call to order the December 10th, 2024 Auburn Planning Board meeting. I will start with the first item on the agenda, which is roll call, and I'll start with my left.
Bob Hayes.
Dave Trask.
Paul Jacques.
Stacy LeBlanc.
Riley Bergeron.
Tim DeRoche.
Maureen Hopkins.
Okay, so I do see that we have two members who are absent, Darren Finnegan and Amanda Garrett. So I will elevate Maureen Hopkins to full member status with voting privileges today. Okay, the next item on the agenda are the meeting minutes. So I would ask if we have any amendments to the meeting minutes, and if not, then I would seek a motion to approve. Seeing no amendments to the meeting minutes, I would seek a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay, I'm abstaining because I was not here last time, but motion does carry. Excellent. All right, next item on the agenda is a workshop. Uses of manufactured housing, trailers, office trailers to allow shipping containers, conduct boxes, railroad cars, and tractor trailer bodies for storage. So I will hand this over to staff. And just kind of a point of order, this is a workshop for us, so obviously this can be interactive in conversation with staff. And as I do see the agenda, you have already noted too that there is a recommendation from staff to hold a public hearing with proposed text changes. So I will hand it over.
The planning board has had the Connex boxes or the shipping containers, storage units, whatever you want to call them, in front of you before. And you recently sent it on to the city council, and the city council reviewed the proposed changes and had some clarifying questions. So it's back in front of the planning board today. Planning staff went through and kind of went through all of the questions and concerns of that came back to us, and did our best to address each and every one of them, which is outlined in your staff memo. And so we've added some definitions, and we've taken away a couple of things that were in there just to kind of clean it up. So one thing that we had in there, for example, was like a design standard that if it matched, it wouldn't have to be buffered or hidden, but then decided that that was just maybe a little too difficult to enforce or determine if it was compatible with the surrounding elements. Is there anything you want to touch on? Or?
No, I think that was pretty much it. Really we're not going to go down through each one of these bullets, but if there's anything that specifically that, that really, cleared out to you that we want to cover, and what the, kind of what the thought process was by staff, we could certainly do that. A lot of it's just cleaning up the definitions, making sure that we can defend it in the field and give clear guidance to the residents of the city as they try to implement some of these things, specifically with Connex boxes and storaging and how much. And the biggest takeaway here is that residential properties, I know there was some discussion, particularly with Mr. Hayes, about how many storage units or Connex boxes per lot. For the residential units, or residential lots rather, we're suggesting a max of 320 square feet. So there's only one. They couldn't be multiple in that particular case. So that was one of the findings that we had, and really defining the industrial uses and the agricultural uses, where and the general business, where these types of businesses could be using them. For instance, there's a mechanical company in town that potentially could convert these Connex boxes to conditioned airspace where they would be doing work in very warm climates or interior of a building or a structure that has really poor ventilation, and they want to add a Connex box that provides them good workspace, a cool workspace to do certain types of technical work that is needed on site. So that's just an example of one.
So I know we've had this for a while on our agenda. Any questions for staff?
I have a real quick question. The 320 square feet, did you arrive at that number? Is that the default size of a standard Connex box? How did you arrive at that?
Yep, that's a 8 by 40 calculation, and that's the standard size for a Connex box.
Thank you. The very last page, the strikeout on 15, was that already there, John? Where it's the shipping containers, which were altered in appearance to resemble the characteristics of the neighborhood, are excluded from the requirements?
Is it 15 of 18 that you're referring to? I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right page.
15 of 16, page 2 of 2. It's part of the uses 60-666.
So in your original recommendation to the council, that was added language, and then now we're suggesting to take it out of the added language. So it never existed in a formal adopted ordinance.
Okay. I just, because I noticed that had the strikeout, but not in red. So I was just trying to understand, because I thought we were talking about putting it in. So when did we just, was it?
So staff took that out based off of council's, if you're looking at the list of questions that came.
I
Do
still
you know where
don't-
I'm, John?
Okay.
No.
So one of the
Section 60-666.
one of the concerns of the council is, what does resemble the characteristics of surrounding structure mean? Color, siding, etc. How does one decide what qualifies and what doesn't? Should we even use this approach, as it seems difficult to interpret and enforce? By the time they add the framing and a roof, couldn't they just built a shed? So you guys had added the language, and then based off that comment, we've taken it back out. We can put it back in, but that's why it looks like that.
Yeah, there was some difficulty with interpretation of characteristics. What is the proper characteristics? There could be a lot of differing opinions on that, and that's the reason why they had made that recommendation.
So basically, so they're allowed as long as they can't be seen from the street or any other neighboring property, full stop. At least that's kind of how I read it, correct? 'Cause I mean, we put that language in there to basically say, well, it could be viewed from other properties or from the street as long as it looked like it wasn't a Connex box.
That's correct, yep.
Did you have something, Paul?
Pat,
Oh, okay.
same as Dave.
Okay.
I just have a quick question, just because I wasn't here for the original discussion. What's the problem this is trying to solve? What was the genesis of these ordinance changes?
So that's a good question. The Connex boxes are used. We even have a Connex box company that rents Connex boxes here in the city. They're used quite often in a lot of different applications, in residential settings, commercial settings, construction settings. And the way that the language reads currently right now, a lot of those Connex boxes are illegal. It would be a real heavy push for our code enforcement. We only have 3 code enforcement folks, and the workload would be it would be pretty tedious, hard to keep up with. So we were trying to make it work because we see the utility in them. I'll be first to admit that some of our own departments within the city use it. I did a project for the city where we had a land swap and we had a landowner agreement, and we had to have, it was in a place where things were getting taken, a construction site. So we used it as storage for building materials and building equipment. I guess my own project that I helped work with the city was not in compliance. So we just really thought that this was something that needed to be addressed. So.
I'm glad Maureen brought the subject up as to why we are here tonight again. And I go back to the original introduction to this issue, which goes back to August. And the first sentence under background is the current city ordinance does not allow the use of the Connex boxes and other similar containers on commercial or industrial lots within the city limits. It goes on to say that it was Bayer that primarily brought this forward because they do have the storage containers that they do rent out and have actually on site, several on Center Street as well as out at Twitchell's Airport. From the beginning, I thought we were talking primarily commercial industrial lots. That same introduction was carried forward at least to one other meeting, and then actually reference to commercial industrial then was dropped. And suddenly we found ourselves talking about residential. And again, I go back to, I raised the question once, because it was after we had decided there's a difference between a trailer that still has wheels or a railroad car that still has wheels versus just a container that's left on the ground. At that one meeting, and I understand there was maybe some confusion as to what my question was, and we just talked about use of trailers and maybe even a railroad car on an agricultural property or a farm property. But I was told that we were still talking commercial, industrial, and not residential. So we have morphed and extended and began to talk about residential. I'm very much still bothered. I can understand the use of rented boxes that are used for storage because of interior retrofit or redesign, refit. So you want to move furniture out, want to have a temporary shelter for that interior furniture. And for moving, I know there's a Bears on Center Street, I've forgotten the company's name, but on Washington Street North, there are the smaller boxes which are used for primarily, I think, for temporary storage, but again, even for moving. So right from the beginning, I will say that I could still consider these boxes, Connex boxes even, for temporary use, but I am not in favor of extended use or keeping of one of these Connex boxes on a residential property. And I'll let some other discussion to partake, but I have put together a list, which is up to 5 right now, reasons why I vehemently oppose the use of a Connex box on a residential property for long-term use.
Yeah, I think where that went, if I remember correctly, was given the amount of boxes that were already out there, I think there was a pivot to say, well, if they are permitted and they are not visible from the road or from a neighboring property, then it's better for staff and easier to manage than to exclude them, which then puts code enforcement in the issue of trying to go deal with all the ones that they see. Granted, they'll still may need to if they're visible, but I think the effort was a compromise to say as long as there's a permit and they're not within visibility, then we can work with that.
Yeah, because I think I also heard, Bob, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard you also say you might have an appetite for temporary storage within a residential area, which I think kind of leads back to what Dave said and what John said, which is kind of from a code enforcement standpoint and really being able to manage temporary. I mean, that could really that could be a lot for a while. So I think what Dave, I heard you say is we can allow it, but if it's not visible, then it's kind of no harm or foul happening to the neighbors, surrounding neighbors, correct?
Correct. And then we added the permit so that so the city is aware of where it is and where it is on the property and has formal approval for it.
May I ask, is staff aware of Connex boxes on residential property as we speak?
Yes, there's multiple out there.
All right, so given that, that makes awareness that there needs to be parameters for such, and that was really the nucleus for it becoming, for the residential topic being included.
Yeah, I believe so. And the more, and the trend is the more rural you get, the more we see them. And we've got a lot of residential strips, and then you've got ag land in the back. So then it could be a multi-use where they've got agriculture and residential in the front. That was something else that staff spoke internally about, where it would be hard to define that. And it's almost seems like it's picking a battle, and some would be okay and others would not. But that's our perspective. But if the board wants to make a recommendation and go a different direction, I think we're totally open to that as well. We'll deal with it at whatever the end result is. But we see this as something that if we could manage it in a sense that we have to permit every one of them and we have to get boots on the ground and look at it and give them a path to making this right, and it's not an eyesore for a neighbor and on somebody's front lawn, and we give them a path to do it that doesn't say they've got to move it and get rid of it and get rid of the stuff that they have inside of it. It would save a lot of time and staff time. I just leave it.
Bob, are
like
you
that.
opposed to having the Connex boxes on residential that are not viewable?
No, because I don't think you can, well,
With a
I'll go
permit?
down my list and I'll just put it on the table. So first, I think we must recognize these boxes are fabricated and meant for commercial industrial use to begin with. And if they are going to be used even on commercial industrial properties, even there, and this goes back to Bayer, I was almost thinking we were talking about the Bayer property on Center Street when we first started talking about this issue. So even there, they need to be screened from the residential properties that are behind. And I feel also that allowing use of in residential areas will over time diminish real estate values. I think that if we begin to see those used on a regular basis, and most of these that are going to be sold for maybe permanent structures on a residential property, I'm kind of assuming too, and I'm assuming because I did speak to the outfit out on Washington Street North, they have two different departments. They have the rental department, they have a sales department. The ones that go out for sale are used boxes. So even by the time they are sold and maybe placed on wherever, they've already been used, and they have some reason they're selling them is because they aren't new, and they show wear and tear and not probably maintained as well as they should. You know, another reason is LD 2003. Already, we're seeing properties becoming more dense because we are allowing an ADU on every property, essentially. So we're already creating greater density, and that means additional toys, maybe with two families, additional cars and trailers, so forth. I think it's very hard to then introduce a box and say it's going to be screened. And again, I think over time, even those lots are going to become smaller, because if you actually have a separate structure as an ADU, at some point in time, I foresee that that's going to become 2 lots. So already our lots over time, I think, are going to become smaller. So I think it's very difficult to have one of these boxes screened. It will be seen. Take the example of Park Avenue. Between, Lake Street and Court Street, there's one large, essentially, it's an old railroad car without the wheels. And it's not even placed properly. It leans, it's out in front. And I ask you, where on that property would it be set that it's not going to be seen?
They would lose the ability to have one there.
Yeah,
because
that's what I
that's
thought
what the
too.
stipulation is.
Well,
where
wait a
if
minute,
some-
I'm not finished, sorry. The other reason is that we have availability of various types of sheds. On the retail market, BJ's, I think through Home Depot, Lowe's, many other retailers have sheds that can be easily assembled. Also, we have a number of actually shed fabricators, one right here in Auburn. We have another one that have outlets, multiple sites around the state. That's a major business. I see no need of introducing these Connex boxes as being a substitute for those. I think we're hurting our own retailers and our own industry partners. So again, I'm willing to see them in the residential areas if they're used as a moving activity or temporary storage structure. But for permanent use, no. And I guess, what we have in front of us tonight, I've marked it up because I still have a lot of questions on some of the language that's before us.
So 2 things. One is, so for Bob's edification, I think, and for the whole board's edification, just kind of parlaying off of Tim's question about the permitting use. If they come for a permit and if it is deemed that they cannot shield from neighbors, would they be approved the permit?
So if they couldn't be shielded from the neighbors, the permit would not be approved.
And if the permit's not approved,
As
does
the
that
way
mean they're
that
not
the
allowed to put
language
it on
is
their property,
proposed.
right?
I'm sorry?
If the permit's not approved, they're not allowed to put it on their property, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, just,
And if it's,
And what type of enforcement would be available to staff about that? Because that box on Park Ave has been there for well over a year. I know exactly what you're talking about. Because that might even be able to be placed behind the house, perhaps. But if, say, staff permits something and it's placed incorrectly, or doesn't say that you don't have a permit for that, what enforcement would be available to you?
so there is, the code enforcement process to be able to find them and to, first we'd notify them, and then the process, you're going to have 30 days. That, the whole 80K process really takes place at that point. We'll have to go through the formal process.
And I had a couple more questions about permitting. I don't know if you want to finish up.
no, go ahead.
So I actually also thought from the first couple meetings that we were talking about not in agricultural and commercial uses and not on residential properties. But so say, for example, that one in Park Ave, say it exists, but they don't apply for a permit. This gets codified and they don't apply for a permit. What would the city do at that point? Would you have to wait till a neighbor reached out to you, or like if something already exists that wouldn't pass the permitting process?
You mean if they put one in and then come to the city for a permit?
I guess that too.
Yeah,
But I mean also like the one on Park Ave that's there. Say they don't come for a permit after because they don't know that all this news are all place.
Yeah, I think it's the same process. Again, we would inform them, and then if they wouldn't comply, and if they install something without a permit, it starts off with a double fee at that point, and then correcting the issue. And then if they don't correct the issue, then that's the formal enforcement process, letters and a certain number of days and public notices and things like that. So it's the 80K process.
But it would be something that would have to be brought to your attention. Like you guys are, like we said, the enforcement's not asking you guys to go look around for Connex boxes. It would be something where someone would have to make a complaint or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's the same. We get those for people building decks and sheds that are too big all the time, every day. We're always getting those same questions. So it's part of what we do. But I think, though, to get to your point, though, Riley, is that I think once we have a clear direction on the Connex boxes, I think there has to be an effort by the city to address it, regardless of whatever direction we want to go. There's enough of it going on throughout the city that something has to be done. So we're just trying to get some guidance, create some some guidelines and some guardrails, and then move forward with the process.
Yeah, so I guess I would query the board about the item that Bob brought up. How do others feel about Connex boxes in residential areas with the idea that it has to have a permit and be shielded from view? How do others feel about it?
They already exist. There needs to be parameters. And if we can agree on parameters that protect everybody's interest, that's something I would be for.
I agree with Tim, and for me, the argument that we have people can buy sheds and stuff like that, and that we're hurting potentially not supporting the people that are already here. Well, we already have Bear, we have other organizations in the area that have for sale and rent the Connex boxes. So they're here in the neighborhood, the industries are here. I don't see that as an argument to not go forth with, as long as they aren't seen and they're permitted. I would imagine that if they're still there, if the house gets sold, then it can be considered a shed, an accessory structure, or it could be moved off or whatever. So
People need to remember these aren't cheap. Number one, delivery isn't cheap, and you need to have the space for it anyway. We know they already exist. There need to be parameters. Just as reasonable human beings, we know that there needs to be something. And if we're able to say, yeah, sure, you can have one if it can't be seen by neighboring properties and it can't be seen by the roadway, sure. And then that negates the vast majority of opportunities for people to do that. We give them parameters, and that's it.
Maureen, Maureen has something. Sorry.
I would just agree with Bob that I don't think it's an appropriate use on a residential lot. And to your point, they're not cheap, and they're not cheap to deliver. They're also not cheap to remove. And I think if you have something with a useful lifespan of 20 to 25 years and you're purchasing it used and it may have been kicking around on the back of a boat somewhere, it's going to quickly turn into a rundown eyesore that's going to be very expensive and difficult for anybody to remove. So I don't see this as being appropriate on a residential lot. I'm also concerned with the screening because it may be properly screened when placed, but trees can be cut, neighbors change, and I think you're opening yourself up to a lot of disparate treatment for people seeking permits or people who already have these on their property when the conditions on the lots change.
Riley?
Going back to, I had been approaching this as thinking about it being on agricultural and commercial land. So as we're going through it, I think that I agree that if there's a permitting process, then I would be in favor that there is a time limit or some sort of temporary status put on them, and that they have to be off or gone at some point. I guess if we're asking, do I think permanent placement of Connex boxes in residential areas is good, I'd say no. But if there's a way that we could permit it and say you have a year or 2 years or whatever to use this as you want and then get rid of it, that would be my preference, I guess.
Regarding the degradation of it, any structure that's built is going to degrade and become an eyesore at some point if it's not properly maintained.
Like a fence
Yeah.
that whole surrounds a pool. Seen enough of those around.
I like what Riley just said about having a time limit, and maybe even going further to say whatever the time limit is, or upon sale of the property. Something, if we were to go down that road, say for a period not to exceed 36 months, or sale of the property, whichever occurs first.
That's right. As I'm thinking it out loud, it will be hard because there's so many different types of situations that they're being used for, and it would probably take another bit of discussion to, if anyone else, if we felt that way, to come up with what an appropriate term limit is. I think sometimes, like if it's an interior, if they're constructing or gutting a house, for instance, you'd need maybe more than 36 months. So I don't know what that would entail, but my preference would be that there would be a time limit put on them.
So are you saying that for a temporary concept? Because I think the permit was for a permanent location not to be seen, whereas there are also probably examples, like John had mentioned, where there's construction going on, they need to lock up their equipment, they drop off a box so that they have all their stuff there. Excuse me, put it in a driveway or whatever. But are you saying that those need a temporary, permit or something like that? And can only be there for a certain amount of time. So that's a separate than the permanent.
Or say the one for construction shows up front, it's only there for a little while or whatever. But if there's the one where someone's trying to, I guess I would be against, because I was really thinking about in agricultural and commercial uses how these, if they're screened, are obviously really useful for a lot of businesses and stuff, especially a lot of agricultural uses. But I don't think that they should be a permanent structure on an on a residentially zoned property.
So even though you could do agricultural use in non-ag zones, you would want it to be just permitted in the ag zone for ag use?
Yeah. That's, I guess, what I would say. Because if you're doing agricultural in a residential zone, I'm sure there's examples, but I think the majority wouldn't need to have enough to put 4 tractor or whatever away. I might be wrong, but I don't think that. I think there's better options than a metal box on the property.
And there might be cheaper ones. And I guess for me, if the neighbors can't see it and it's properly located and it's properly permitted, if you want to spend a fortune getting it there because for some reason you got a fancy for a Connex box, then I'm okay with that. So
I guess I think it would be very hard to be fully screened from neighbors in most, and maybe that's the best part of the process, the permitting process, is that it's so screened so well that all the neighbors are okay with it. But I don't know how often that would be the case.
If we land on at least temporary in the residential area, it's going to solve a lot of our problems. We're going to get to a location that solves a lot of the issues for the city. The residential areas is, could be debatable. The only question I have for the board would be the screening part for the temporary might not be something that applies in a case where it's under a construction thing or something that a house burns, people are trying to clean up a house. It could be better suited on the front of the property. Maybe we could, as staff, we could work on language that way that allows it in the residential uses for temporary uses and identify those. And I don't have any, we do have a heavy workload next month, but I don't have any problems revisiting this as a workshop with a list of items that we think could be temporary uses in the residential area.
Actually,
Yeah,
I guess.
gotta be honest, I don't love the idea of a temporary use with visibility. It just screams to me like it goes exactly against what I feel like people are saying with residential uses, that it'd be very difficult to find a temporary use with screening, all of it, packaging this all together. And then if someone is trying to have a temporary for multiple reasons and they're going to put it on the front of their lawn for a year, I mean, what's temporary? You know what I mean? So I just think that just adds more eyesore to the issue of having Connex boxes in residential areas, personally.
Yeah, I think that maybe there's a compromise to be had where if it's not screened to staff's approval, then there's some sort. There can be temporary ones that don't meet this full screening process or something, and say it's a year. But then if it's going to be more than a year, then it has to meet these some screening regulations so that you don't have to.
Oh, go ahead, Natalie.
I just jotted down what I think I'm hearing Riley state. So storage containers placed on a residential property not in conjunction with an active building permit shall be limited to temporary placement not to exceed blank months or sale of property. Is that kind of what you're trying to get at, where it wouldn't be, this would be people putting it on their property not in conjunction with building or construction?
Yeah, that's just my personal feeling. It's not I think that would make sense. And if it was going to be temporary, then it wouldn't have to meet. But as long as if the screening's a stringent process and staff thinks it's screened from neighbors, I guess I don't have a.
Would temporary be screened? Like that seems like that'd be really hard, because if they're doing like construction
Yeah.
or something,
I don't.
so then you could have all these pop-up temporary Connex boxes on all these residential lawns.
Yeah, for a year.
Do we limit temporary
It's
to
better.
just in conjunction with a permit? I mean, a building permit?
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
It wouldn't be shielded, it would be tied to the building permit, and then I'm assuming that there's a way for the city to know that when whatever is, the permit was pulled for is complete,
But then it's tied to a construction or a remodel.
they'd have to just figure out a way to have it, an end, a known end, so, great, we did our final plumbing inspection, or whatever the final step is.
Issuance of occupancy and the box goes.
Yep.
Yep, we could certainly add some of that language. I think that would, again, I think it's good, healthy discussion. I think this ultimately helps out staff at the end of the day and helps out our code folks to address an issue that's ongoing.
I do have a little more. So if it's used for agricultural purposes, any of the residential areas can be used for agricultural purposes. So it would fit in a different temporary category, if you know what I mean. It really wouldn't be temporary. So
I might have missed, I meant on ag land, not necessarily just for agricultural uses.
Well, but it doesn't say what zone. It just says for agricultural uses,
I
I
think
believe.
the intent was on lots that are being, where the primary use is agricultural use, not like a residential use where they have a garden or they might be using it for that.
So do
but-
we need to
Yeah.
clarify that in language?
Yeah,
it-
like I have 3 acres that could easily be used.
Yeah, and I
I'm
guess
in
that-
residential, so.
Yeah, and I guess that was my original thought, Paul, when I mentioned it earlier. We could use the term principal use being agriculture, right? We've talked about that quite a bit recently. But the interesting piece about this is that in the low-density country residential zones, which is residential zone, and the rural residential zone allows agricultural uses. So perhaps we should include those. I think that there would be a push against that, where those types of agricultural uses are allowed in those zones. It may apply in that area. What does that mean? You got to put the Conex box only in the ag zone, the back of the lot, and out of sight and out of mind. But
Okay.
They are usually larger lots, so you don't always have a neighbor looking over your driveway kind
right,
of thing.
but it becomes difficult to, again, goes back to enforcement and how that's interpreted. So we should identify the zone that it's allowed in, I guess, is what I'm getting to.
Yep,
getting
I
at.
agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I get, for me, if we're saying that a railroad car can be allowed for agricultural use, you know, I guess, but a Connex box can't be unless it's like hidden and tucked away. I mean, I don't know, I don't want to look at a railroad box either.
Even if it's on wheels.
Well, fancy wheels, I guess.
So Bob, I see you're ready to speak. I also have a question too. So Bob said he kind of has a laundry list of updates to the language that he wants addressed. How would you best suggest we approach it? And is it a fair amount that you said you have edits?
Actually, I'll also ask the question, are we the only community that's trying to deal with this issue in Maine? Are there some other communities that might have already considered the use of these boxes, and could we maybe lead on what has already been discussed and approached and what has been done?
We could certainly look. I haven't looked at what other communities are doing, so.
And I guess, earlier, the 3-page workup, I guess under subsection 14, there were a number of dots that I did have some, question on. So they're not numbered, and it might be easier starting at the bottom. And there's a dot says, is a pad, concrete, or gravel required? And I guess, and the answer to that is no pad is required, which surprises me because these are heavy boxes to begin with. And I think, and I'm not sure, do we have requirements if somebody comes in and wants to build a shed or place a shed? Is a requirement for some sort of a base?
Depending on the size, anything over 200 square feet does require frost protection, so to that end, yep.
Okay, so already up in another point, we're saying, storage limited to a max of 320. So obviously, the answer then to at least those over the square footage that you just mentioned does need a pad. Going up the next point, actually, under the state, there are provisions for temporary use of these boxes or, what do they call them, temporary structures. And they suggest maybe temporary structure up to 180 days, so that's at least one period of time that could be considered for for permitting purposes. I guess I'm bothered, the the fourth point up. What does resemble the characteristics of surrounding structures mean, color, siding, etc.? How does one decide what qualifies and what doesn't? Should we even use this approach, as it seems difficult to interpret and enforce? By the time they add the framing and a roof, couldn't they have just built a shed? We have struck this from the ordinance amendment. So we're even giving up, and we're relying only on screening, as opposed to trying to encourage some sort of, even if it's just painting, to make a box be better suited and more fitting to a residential area. Further up, how many are allowed on a parcel? Can they be stacked? Actually, can they be stacked? I don't see that that's even answered, but they're limited to 320 square feet of storage per lot. That doesn't say that it has to be one box. So it could be more than one. And I guess, and I said this before, 320 square feet, yeah, that's 8 by 40. And I'm not sure what the size of the railroad car that sits on Park Avenue, but that's a big structure. And on some of our lots that, and again, I go back to that we already may have an ADU on and still be allowed to have a shed, and probably we wouldn't, because you couldn't hide it in a residential area. And I guess, and I've forgotten which point it was, but there was a question about, yeah, you can screen it from a current residence or within the current neighborhood, but if there's an empty lot and somebody wanted to build on it, the party with the box doesn't have to screen it against that new property. So that, to me, immediately, if I see an empty lot and thinking about building on it, but yet somebody has an 8 by 40 Connex box, it might be screened from in the area, but it's not going to be screened from me. That takes the value of that empty lot away from me, at least. So I'll end by just saying that there's a use for these temporary boxes, and I think that's where we need to get, is, what is temporary and for what uses. So I think that, and I'd like to know what other communities have done.
Yeah, so I'm going to chime in here real quick. I think we have, I feel like, talked about temporary, we've talked about residential. I feel like staff, and correct me if I'm wrong, do you feel like you have a good sense of the board and how we feel about the residential area and temporary caring for folks? Do you guys feel like you have what you need? Okay, I feel that way too. I feel like we've each had our say, and we feel like staff feels like they have what they need to. So, anything else you need from us?
No, I think this is good.
Okay.
May I ask one last question? So I guess my question would be, if we move forward with the permit and everybody verifies that it can't be seen from a neighbor, and then 6 months, 12 months, the tree falls down, the shed or whatever there was, there's something that changes so that now it is visible. How is that addressed? Because it was permitted, they placed it, it was there, and I think there was some questions around, well, if maybe the new people move in and they've got better eyesight, or if there's a tree that was there that they now have chopped down and now it can be, can we put in some language that basically says
how that will be handled.
Yeah, so I'm not going to speak for you, staff, but I will. What I will allow too is for you guys to take this back and kind of build that in a little bit more to our packet the next time we have it. But I think what I can guess is going to happen is that we're going to use a code enforcement, right? So I think John had talked about whether it's this structure. I don't know if everyone remembers the Stevens Mills house that they moved everything from the inside, outside. Do you remember that? I don't know if you drove by it. It was so unsightly. And they went through that process, the same thing of, fines, notices, public, you know what I mean? Like all that kind of stuff. But I'll definitely have staff kind of note that too, right? Like in writing how we would. Yeah,
That's
because
perfect.
you had mentioned it, Maureen had mentioned it.
I just wanted to acknowledge that Maureen had mentioned it, and I think it would
Perfect.
be valid to try to incorporate that somehow with some language.
Yep, perfect.
I think that question might be answered where they said that the Connex box would not need to meet visibility requirements from structures built after it was legally permitted to be there. So if it was legally permitted to be there and then Bob wanted to buy that spare property, that empty lot, it wouldn't have to be screened from that because that would be being built after the Connex box is already permitted.
So that's to Bob's point is what you're saying. So Bob had that point. Mm-hmm. Yep, okay. There we go. All right, everyone good? We can move on to the next item. So the next item on the agenda is the workshop to discuss the upcoming comprehensive plan, various elements, and the role that we play in relation to the plan.
So as you probably all know, we are working on a comprehensive plan update, a brand new comprehensive plan, and I put together a PowerPoint on what is going on. So I thought we'd start by just going over what is a comprehensive plan. So it's a long-range policy document. It is very much regulated by the state of Maine. There is a growth management law that really outlines what needs to be there. It addresses not only the individual goals of each municipality and how they plan to achieve it, but also statewide goals and how our city will contribute towards the statewide goals. And it really was a foundation for land use ordinances, which you guys apply to everything that you do and help write. And typically, they are updated every 10 to 12 years. The Growth Management Act requires a municipality to start their next process 10 years after the last one was put into effect. So a little more on the Growth Management Act. It was enacted in 1988, and really the reason was that development was happening very unorganized. There was a lot of spaghetti lots, things were happening, and nothing was really put in the same area to allow for like growth in a structured way. And a lot of what Maine strives on is keeping our rural character. And this was also a way to help keep growth areas and rural areas addressed and documented and where we want to see growth. Things that are required from comprehensive plans are inventories. So on the next slide, I'll go over like each of the individual inventories, looking at different policies and how we implement them, which in our city would look like a zoning ordinance change. In other smaller towns, it might not be zoning, but it might be other ways that they're addressing things. And a lot of the Growth Management Act encourages like regional cooperation and making sure that our goals are, like I said, overall helping meet the statewide goals in conjunction with our neighboring towns. So the statewide goals are really looking at orderly growth, protecting natural resources, looking at affordable housing, increasing the amount of housing we have, economic opportunities, looking at our agriculture and forestry land, special habitats and wildlife, quality of stormwater, and quality of our drinking water, but also managing our stormwater, looking at the coast and hazards around that, and preserving historic and cultural resources. And those are very broad overviews of the statewide goals. They've got very specific timelines and specifics on those. So what makes up a comprehensive plan? So to begin, it really looks at a vision statement of what we want to achieve as a city and how we see ourselves currently. So in the inventory section, you're really looking at what do we have right now? So we're looking at our soils and our geology, our habitats, our historic and archaeological resources, agriculture, forestry, marine resources, local and regional economy, our population and demographics, our land use patterns, housing, transportation, recreation and open spaces, public facilities. And one thing that we added semi-recently, which I don't know of any other city or town in the state that has, is promoting food access and production from and growing the agricultural economy. And then you go into, okay, how do we achieve our vision? How does it align with the state goals? And then there will be a section on looking at our zoning and our growth areas and how those all align. And then the last usually section of it or appendix is looking at a timeline for implementing things, the funding, which is typically done through a capital improvement plan, which will be incorporated into it, and responsibilities. So which department might be focused on this, or would it be a planning board's role, different things like that. For the proposed actions that are going to help us achieve those goals. So one thing really cool about Auburn is we had one of the first, not the first, but one of the first comprehensive plans in the state. So we enacted our first one in 1967, which was 22 years before the Growth Management Act went into place. And then we had our first major revision to it in the 1980s, which really focused on looking at our economic changes and the growth that had happened here. In 1995, we adopted our second, we did a full rerun really, but it did a lot of major revisions and looked at development and community engagement. Then our last real plan was done in 2010, which really brought in the modern land use practices and the zoning ordinance and emphasis on the environmental considerations. And then in 2021, we did an update to the 2010 plan, which focused on recreation and open space and transportation and walkability, and that food access and agriculture piece. And then so this 2025 plan is looking at what we want to do in the city land use wise over the next decade. So I kind of went over this. The key focuses were the recreation and open space, transportation, future land use, housing, food access, and agriculture. So in order to do that 2021 comprehensive plan update, they put together 3 working groups. So a recreation, open space, agriculture, a transportation, and a zoning working group. And they, targeted all of these 6 sections and came up with draft language and then got it adopted by the state. So thus far in our 2025 comprehensive plan update process, we have formed a committee, and that was done over numerous council meetings, but we officially have a committee, and the current makeup of the committee is on the bottom here, but it is made up of the mayor, 12 resident members, 2 planning board members, and 2 city councilors. And the responsibilities as drafted in the order by the city council is to develop a compliant comprehensive plan and implementation strategies, review zoning district regulations and prepare recommendations, and analyze relevant municipal data and resources to support planning efforts. So the city is hiring a comprehensive plan consultant. We put out an RFP in October, and it just recently closed, but the objective of that RFP was to select a qualified planning consultant to assist the committee with developing the plan. So you might see some working groups coming out of that to work on each thing. All that stuff will be set once we've selected a consultant and they're going forward. Some of the key focus areas, we're really looking at affordable housing and workforce development, sustainability and climate change adaptation, adaptation, there we go, transportation, land use, and village revitalization, and natural resource protection and recreation. And the scope of their services are really gonna come down to conducting the reviews, inventories, future projection, developing our goals, policies, implementations, and ensuring that we are consistent with the state policy and doing enough public engagement so everybody has an opportunity to voice their thoughts throughout the process. So we received 5 bids, and they were from Haley Ward out of Portland, Viewshed, which is out of Yarmouth, North Star out of New Gloucester, Barry Dunn, which is out of Portland, and Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, which was out of Franklin, Tennessee. And I don't know if I did. Oh, I think it's on the next slide. Okay. So public engagement throughout the process. The committee will host many public meetings, surveys, workshops. They're going to engage, the hope is to engage people from all demographics while doing this. So a really diverse group of residents, people who work here, to get really good feedback and updates so that when we're doing the plan, it's comprised of everyone in the town or a selection of everyone in the town. And the outcome is a vision-driven, community-supported plan that addresses Auburn's future challenges and opportunities. So we're looking at a timeline that would encompass kind of the next 18 months. So the RFP was released in October. We've received all the 5 proposals. We will have hopefully selected someone by the end of the year, the 23rd of December. Execute a contract with them for January, and then hopefully start the project and everything come February. And then from there, the 18 months will kind of be in the start. So the next steps are they'll do some interviews with some of the consultants over the next couple weeks, and then the committee will make a recommendation to the city council to see who they want to recommend to be our consultant. And that is the slideshow. Is there any questions?
You did a great job on that, by the way. Phenomenal.
Did you build this? Did you build the slideshow?
I did.
Yeah.
Good job.
It was great job. Yeah.
Given the 18-month timeline, we're actually looking at a 2026 plan, correct?
Probably, yes.
Okay.
I believe when this all started, it was supposed to be a 2025 plan.
Okay, beautiful. With regard to the breakout groups, are those just a subsection of the committee, or will those groups be asking or additional people potentially get involved in some of those subgroups, or is it limited to just the committee?
It will be dependent on what the committee wants. They might ask for subject experts to come in for certain things, or people in the community who are going to be directly impacted by that group that maybe aren't in the comprehensive plan update committee.
Yeah, and a lot of that will be driven by the consultant and what they, how they want to, get the information across or get the information out of the community. So there could be many different ways that they set that up. We've seen it many different ways.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and I think that obviously I'm glad that there's a good approach and an acknowledgement that we need members across the demographics of the city. I guess given that they may not be always, I guess for me, I'm curious as to how you're going to do that in order to find those areas in those pockets, because they might not be checking the website or know that that's even going on. So I love the fact that that's going to be a push, and hopefully the involvement will really represent all of what the city has.
I think reading through the RFP, I saw that was a huge goal and priority of the people who drafted the RFP, and each one of the consultants are experienced in this field and have their ways to engage the public, however that is.
I'm kind of assuming that whatever meetings actually occur here in Auburn itself will be public meetings, so people, even though they're not on a committee or participating directly, at least can be free to come in and observe and follow the discussions.
Yeah, that was one of my questions too, and I wondered too if the consultant and the committee could do like executive sessions, and kind of, I wonder if that's like part of it too, if they could do that.
I've never been involved with a comprehensive plan that had any type of executive
That'd
session.
be great. Okay, cool.
Personally, so.
There are very strict state regulations around open meeting laws and what would constitute being allowed under a executive session, and I can't imagine anything in a comprehensive plan would fall under those
Perfect.
really slim parameters.
Awesome. Good. Any question?
Yeah, question, at the state level, is there a planning office? What sort of review at the state level now does comprehensive plans fall under?
So it falls under the Department of Agriculture and Forestry, and I'm sure that there's a little more words to that state office, but they are the ones who will review the comprehensive plan. I believe they have 3 planners, so one of them will get designated Auburn's plan, and then the in past municipalities that I've worked for that have gone through this process, typically they would meet with a few people from the town and maybe like the chair of the committee, and they'd go over any recommendations that they would have on the plan. It would come back, we'd make revisions, and then send it back.
That's a good question, Bob. The state just hired a new head of, they're going to reestablish, it's not called the State Planning Office, but there's going to be a new head. And I think some of those employees that scattered about when they got rid of they got rid of the State Planning Office, they'll come back into that office and be more of a centralized unit. So, but they're just coming on board within the next month or so. I don't know any of the particulars, but I'm sure that by the time that this, it's ready for review by the state, they'll stand up this new state department or division of whatever. So,
Actually, a staffed office with additional personnel than has been maybe been the case over the last couple or 3 years.
yeah, they've been spread out. The state planning office was spread out among a bunch of different departments within ACF. So it's been a little different than what was in the past. Let's say what you guys did in 2010, certainly.
All right, good stuff. Okay, next item on the agenda is public comment. At this time, I will open up public comment. Please state your name, your address, and you have 5 minutes.
Good evening. My name is John Cleveland. I live at 183 Davis Avenue in Auburn. I really just wanted to take a moment to compliment Natalie. In my private life, for 35 years, I was a consultant to primarily municipalities, and I've done many of these comprehensive plan as a consultant to these communities. And the summary that Natalie put together was clear, easy to understand, really covered all of the bases, and a very helpful document that she had. And I just want to take a moment to compliment her excellent work.
You can smile, Natalie. You did a great job.
It's okay.
You really did. It was fantastic. Copyright that. Anyone else? All righty. So the next item on the agenda is miscellaneous.
Yeah, so it seems like the first thing is upcoming meeting agenda. So I have a draft agenda that we could look at really quick. But so next month we've got quite a few developments that came in. So we were maybe looking at some subdivision on, a subdivision on Riverside Drive, looking at a sign waiver for Cooper Paving, which is on Turner Road. And we will bring LD 2003 back with some comments. Then we will also be looking at some proposed edits that are coming out of the Mayor's Ad Hoc Committee on Bonafide Agriculture, Recreation, and Natural Resources. And the Connex boxes will be coming back to you, it seems like in another workshop
As a
format.
workshop. Yep, that's what I thought. Perfect. Great.
Did we capture the large project, the big,
Oh, you know what, that's on the plan review. I didn't get a chance to come back and update this. So the other thing that's coming is I think it's 44 unit, single family houses on Danville Corner Road
Okay.
in a subdivision.
Okay.
And the other thing we have under miscellaneous is a discussion about meeting minute format, which we talked about at the last meeting briefly, but because Stacy wasn't here, we wanted to wait until we had more until everyone was here. And so you'll see on these minutes that you have from tonight's or from last month's meeting, we identified who the members were that who voted in opposition and abstained. And one of the reasons that this might be beneficial to do minutes going forward like that is if anything was tabled or if they wanted to be reconsidered at a future meeting, only the people who voted on the project in the affirmative can bring it back up
Okay,
and
perfect.
vote on it. So just wanted to talk amongst yourselves if that's something that you want to do going forward or not.
If it's not too much trouble for staff, I noticed it in the last meeting minutes, and it seems like it makes sense to keep track of.
Yeah, I agree with Riley. If it's not too much work, absolutely.
So Jackie does our minutes, and she didn't have any issues doing that.
Okay.
So.
Perfect. All righty. So thank you for covering miscellaneous. At this point in time, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent. I hope everyone has a good night. Yeah, I know. Happy holidays.
This is coming.